Elias worked the rough timber with a heavy, rusted adze, stripping the bark from an oak log that had weathered a century of coastal gales. The salt air stung, settling over the gray stones of his cliffside workshop. He was a man carved by the same wind, his hands thick and scarred, his eyes the color of winter iron. He did not build ships for smooth waters. He built them to survive the fury of the midnight squalls. Below his workshop, the ocean slammed against the bedrock, a rhythmic, deafening reminder of the world's indifference. Elias paused, running a calloused palm over the raw grain of the oak. He found the knurled knots, the places where the tree had suffered, twisted, and grown dense with hardened resin. Those were the parts that held the hull together when the deep waters tried to tear it apart. Smooth wood, grown quickly in sheltered valleys, always splintered at the first sign of a storm. He brought the adze down again, the sharp thud echoing against the cliff face. The crunch of fine leather boots against the gravel broke the rhythm of the waves. It was Marcus, a merchant whose fortune spanned 3 port cities, wrapped in a heavy cloak of dyed wool. His face, usually flushed with the arrogant authority of wealth, was drawn and pale, hollowed by a sickness he could no longer hide.
Elias, I have less than a year left.
Elias did not look up. He kept his grip on the tool. The tide comes for every shore.
I have spent my life building a fortress of coin. I bought my son Julian every comfort so he would never know the bitter cold or the hunger I knew. I have secured his inheritance. He will never have to lift a finger, never have to bleed. Yet I look at him now and I am terrified. He is soft. He flinches at a strong breeze. Have I secured his future or have I condemned him?
Elias struck the wood, letting the blade rest deep in the oak. He turned his iron gaze to the merchant. The wind whipped fiercely between them. You have given him a heavy ship with no helm, and a sea of calm weather that will not last. Come with me to the lower harbor. I will show you what becomes of the things we shelter from the storm. They descended the narrow stone steps toward the ruins of the old governor's manor, long abandoned to the salt and the earth. Elias led Marcus into a sprawling courtyard, entirely sheltered by massive stone walls that blocked the coastal winds. In the center lay the shattered remains of an enormous pine tree. It had grown incredibly tall, its trunk thick but pale, before snapping entirely at the base. Look at the timber. The governor planted this to be the crown of his garden. He built these high walls to protect it from the gales. Because it never had to fight the wind, its roots never dug deep into the bedrock. It grew fast, fat, and weak. Elias looked at the merchant, his voice dropping like an anvil. You cannot buy strength for a man, just as you cannot buy roots for a pine. By shielding your son from the harsh winds of necessity, you have denied him the deep roots of resilience. When the storms of life arrive, and they will arrive, he will shatter under his own weight. The tree that never fights the wind falls to the first heavy snow. They walked further down to the stagnant waters of the inner cove, far from the crashing surf of the open sea. Tied to a decaying pier was a massive galleon, painted in peeling gold and crimson. It had not sailed in decades. Below the waterline, the hull was eaten entirely by rot and barnacles, the wood turning to soft black mud at the touch. That vessel belonged to the old magistrate's heir. His father built it of the finest valley cedar, outfitted it with silk sails, and left it to him fully provisioned. The son had no need to fish, no need to trade, no need to sail. So he kept it tied here, safe in the harbor, throwing feasts upon its decks. Elias reached down, driving his heavy fingers straight through the side of the ship, pulling out a handful of wet, crumbling wood. The water does not respect the gold on the bow. It looks only for the density of the timber. A life without purpose, without the friction of the struggle, breeds rot in the soul. You leave your son an empire of wealth, but you rob him of the hunger required to maintain it. A ship built for the harbor is already a sunken vessel. They left the stagnant harbor, walking upward along the cliff's edge toward the searing heat of the local foundry. The roar of the ocean was replaced by the deafening ring of steel striking anvil. Elias stopped at the threshold of the open workshop, pointing to a magnificent broadsword resting on a dusty workbench. The weapon was untouched by the whetstone, its hilt heavy with polished brass and set jewels. It was cast entirely of soft iron, poured directly into a mold, and left to cool without a single strike of the smith's hammer. "Look at this blade," Elias said, running a rough thumb over the blunt, thick edge. The old lord ordered it forged merely for display, to hang above his hearth. It has never known the anvil's true wrath. It has never been thrust back into the flames, never been folded and hammered until the weakness and impurities were violently driven out. He turned the blade, letting the dim light catch its unblemished surface. "You have molded your son for the scabbard, Marcus, not the battle. By handing him a life of absolute ease, removing the furnace of hardship from his path, you leave him a blunt instrument in a world of sharp edges. When he is finally struck against the real armor of the world, he will not cut through. He will bend, dull, and break. The iron that escapes the hammer shatters in the fight." Elias set the useless sword down and led the merchant to the very edge of the precipice. Below them, where the black rocks met the churning, freezing surf, a young man was hauling a heavy fishing skiff onto the shingle. The tide violently battered his legs, threatening to drag him under. His hands were bleeding, his breathing ragged, but his stance was immovable. His eyes were sharp, his jaw set like granite against the gale. "That is my grandson," Elias murmured, the salt wind whipping his coarse beard. "I gave him no silver. I gave him an empty boat, a ragged net, and the brutal, unforgiving truth of the ocean. He has starved, he has frozen, and he has failed more times than he can count. But look at his spine, it does not bend." Elias stepped closer to the merchant, his voice dropping to a low, commanding rumble. "To give a man nothing but the absolute necessity to survive is to grant him the greatest inheritance of all, the iron will to conquer his own fate. When the storm finally comes for him, he will not drown. He will build a new vessel from the wreckage. The empty hand learns to forge the finest spear." Marcus stared down at the young man battling the surf, the truth settling upon him like a heavy, suffocating shroud. The lifelong delusion of his wealth burned away in the biting wind. The ultimate act of love is not the removal of struggle, but the deliberate preparation for it. It is not the sheltering of the flame, but the raw exposure to the wind that forces the ember to become an unquenchable inferno. We believe we love our children by handing them a completed map, but true love is leaving them lost in the bitter wilderness, so they must learn to navigate by the stars. Your legacy is not the gold you leave, resting in their palms, but the calluses you allow them to build. It is not the fortress you construct around them, but the armor you force them to forge for themselves. True provision is not the inheritance of comfort, but the inheritance of brutal resilience. It is not the avoidance of pain, but the absolute mastery of it. To leave them nothing is to leave them everything. The fire of true purpose, the bitter wisdom of the cold, and the unyielding strength to stand upright when the turning of the ages attempts to break them. You, watching this now, look at the fortresses you are building. Look at the people you are desperately trying to protect. Are you sheltering them, Or are you quietly weakening them? Are you truly loving them? Or are you simply feeding your own pride, terrified that their suffering will somehow reflect poorly upon your legacy? We live in an era obsessed with comfort, where the avoidance of friction has become the highest societal virtue. But absolute comfort is the silent assassin of the human soul. Look around your own life. Are you softening the blow for someone who desperately needs to feel the impact? Are you hoarding wealth and ease, hoping it will somehow cheat the harsh, unyielding reality of existence? You cannot buy immunity from the world's indifference. If you are a parent, a mentor, or a guide, ask yourself if the smooth path you are clearing is robbing them of their own strength. Stop carrying those who have the legs to walk. Stop fighting battles that belong to their destiny. The storm is coming for you and for them. If you truly love them, let them face the wind. If this truth resonated with you, like this video so it can reach those who need it most. Subscribe for more timeless wisdom. Comment, I will forge my own strength to seal this lesson.